And welcome back. We are keeping an eye on those developments at the Cornwall Hill College, and we will bring you up to speed shortly. But right now, let's turn our attention to the South African Post Office. Now, the Post Office will be cutting down a number of its outlets by merging some post offices across the country to cut down on its overhead expenditure and running costs. The entity says it has ensured that there will be no branches in rural areas that are considered for merging, so as to continue operating as an access point for government services such as social grants and motor vehicle licenses. Currently, there are about 1,500 post offices in South Africa, and the effect of the initial lockdown caused by COVID-19 dealt a financial blow on the entity's already ailing revenue. Now, the post office has, however, seen some improvement in revenue since the resumption of economic activity. For more on this, we are joined by the South African Post Office CEO, Nomkita Mona. Ms. Mona, thanks for your time. Welcome to Morning Live.
Thank you, Sakina, and thank you for having us.
Now, as you might have heard, I'm sure you did, comments coming through as news came about of some of the post offices having to merge. There's great concern about the distribution of social grants as one, and also the assurance that there won't be disruption to universal postal services obligations that are intended for all South African communities.
The concern is quite understandable, Sakina, but I also think it has a lot to do with how we did actually communicate the matter last week or when we were responding to Parliament. The context is very important to give to South Africans, that this process of merging and of rationalizing post offices started in 2016. So it's a long process that's been happening. That's the first thing. The number of 130 post offices that were supposed to be either closed or merged was 130. That was the target at the time. Up to now, more than 50 have already been closed over time. So that's the first thing. The second thing is this is not going to be an overnight, activity or action. We are going to be phasing it in the next 2 to 3 years, even the additional ones that do need to be closed. But also, I think what's important is that people will not lose access, because the reason why we ended up having to close is that the post office comes from having more than about 1,500 outlets countrywide. So that's the first thing. But the second thing was that then you ended up with 3 post offices within a 3 to 5 kilometer radius. I mean, that can't be a sustainable business model in any business. That's the first thing. So therefore, as we close those ones, we make sure that we merge them into a post office closer to where people were used to be served, and that is the process that we are embarking on.
So is that an undertaking that the mergers will be taking place within a 3 to 5 kilometer radius?
That is the main focus thereof. That's the first one. But you also found that because of that strategy that said, let's move to where the people are and where, there was traffic, there was a tendency to leave our own owned buildings, even if it's within the same, like maybe 1 kilometer within the same area, and we went inside the mall. So now what we're doing is we're actually going back to some of our own buildings as well. So you may find that the rationalization doesn't mean that you've actually closed the post office in that region. You've just gone back to your own post office owned building.
So you also told Parliament last week about the losses that you've incurred for this year, budgeting for 6.9 billion rand in expenses, projected to make 4.8 billion rand, which leaves you with a 2.1 billion rand operating loss. And if we look at the last financial year, you had 3.3 billion rand in expenses and 6.4 billion rand, or rather, the revenue register was at 3.3 billion and your expenses were at 6.4 billion. And you said that the biggest cost driver for you was your staff and staff-related budget items. So let's talk about that. How many employees does the post office actually have?
In our books, we have 16,765 employees that are in our books currently. But if you remember, you also mentioned it, that there may very well be ghosts in the system. So we took that because the minister, when I was briefed as well, she also said you do need to check whether those numbers are accurate. And interestingly, even from our own labor unions, they also have flagged the issue to say you do need to make sure that you do indeed have those many people working for the post office. So we have already embarked on a process of staff verification where we expect that employees must come and give us proof of life, where they are, who they are, which offices they work in. Of course, the COVID-19, sometimes some people working from home is a challenge, but we are making sure that everybody verifies themselves. And we've said to the staff members, come end of this month, if you have not verified yourself as an employee bona fide of the post office, you are not going to get paid. So that is something that we're already dealing with, and we're quite comfortable with the progress we've made.
So looking at the post office going forward, and obviously you need to turn the tide and start to show, some money. But as things stand at the moment, one of the reasons why the post office was actually given the contract to distribute social grants was because of the footprint of the post office. And now when the post office is embarking on closing down or merging offices, how is that going to impact on the social grant distribution process?
If we consider that the post office had 1,500 branches in the country and the closure of 130 branches, especially in dense areas, in the urban areas, it shouldn't actually affect them at all. We have made a commitment that we will not be doing any of this in the rural areas. We also do know that those post office branches are not viable financially. And that's why it's important that government supports us there, but we will continue to do the work. Access and universal access is a very big part of the post office, and we will continue doing that. It will not actually affect the people.
Well, in addition to access, the post office also has to be effective and efficient at the services that it provides. One of the complaints that we regularly get is that it takes forever for the post office to deliver mail. If you want to send someone a postcard or a gift for Christmas, you better send it this year Christmas to reach next year Christmas. Things like that. And these are not folk tales. These are realities of how long it takes in certain instances for mail or parcels to reach people. So if you can just reflect on that, Ms. Mona, but also I see the post office is going ahead with trying to reclaim its space by saying that other distributors like Postbank, for example, are not allowed to actually distribute parcels that weigh 1 kilogram or less. So talk to us about what's happening there and what it is that you're hoping to achieve, although they have also interdicted that particular ruling.
Sure, but you are referring to Postnet and not Postbank.
Postnet, I apologize, Postnet.
Yes, but to start with the first part of your question, we accept that we have had problems in the past. We still are experiencing some of those problems. However, we have put in place a number of action items in the last 2 months that we are able to deliver parcels for people and letters, etc. So the whole company now, we have a new ethos that we talk about being obsessed with the customer. That is where it starts. Because if we don't understand why we exist and the fact that we exist for the customer, you will have those issues. Secondly, we are looking at issues around productivity. This is a matter that we raised even with the union when we engaged with them last week, that it's important that they speak to the employees as much as we also speak to them. Productivity is going to be key, focus to customer, making sure that people deliver, because also remember, this is now the springboard for the future of the post office, because the future of the post office is not in mail anymore. It is in the e-commerce space where you're going to have parcels delivered, etc. On the matter that you raise around the sub 1 kilogram parcel delivery, by law in South Africa, the post office is the only entity that is licensed to do that work. That's all we're saying. So that's firstly. But secondly, I would not wish to get into the details of that matter because, as you also say, it still is before the courts. But otherwise, we are continuing to gear ourselves up for e-commerce, but making sure that we are delivering the parcels.
And then also, you know, talking about a cash-strapped post office, basically bankrupt post office at this stage. But then you have a situation in Limpopo where a service provider has basically attached some satellite dishes and set-top boxes. What's going on there? And how did that situation come about?
It's rather intricate, but what had happened is that the SA Post Office had a subsidiary called CFG, and that CFG was the one that actually rented the premises to store the set-top boxes. That was the first thing. Now, because CFG is under liquidation, because of a decision that was taken internally that it should be liquidated and then the employees be absorbed into the post office. So therefore, we could not, by law, pay from the post office coffers the debts that were run up by that company. So it was a technical issue, basically. We have since managed to resolve that matter. The rental had been paid and the set-top boxes would have been released. So that matter was resolved, but it was really just a technical matter. And of course, it had something to do with the fact that we hadn't paid for a while.
And what about the Postbank? Because many people had thought that this would probably be where the state would look at in terms of establishing a state bank. But it seems as though, you know, this particular issue may or may not take off because of the financial position of the post office.
No, I think these are two different matters. The first thing is that the state is talking about setting up a state bank, and I think the state would be very well placed to respond to that question. What is happening with the Post Bank currently is that the department has decided to separate it from the post office, and also with a view to commercializing the bank. So that is the process that is happening currently. We still are sister companies, but the process of separation is underway, and it's got nothing to do with the state bank discussion directly. So I'd like us to kind of separate it, but that process is underway.
But the reality is that even before Parliament, when discussions were had about the establishment of a state bank, the Postbank was one of the entities that was looked at. And at this point, I think the Post Office has to concede that because of your poor financial position, that doesn't even become a viability. So what does this mean for people who do have post bank accounts? As you said, this particular entity is a standalone, we get that. But what does it mean for people who continue to do business with the post bank going forward, given the perilous position of the post office? And I fully get what you are saying, Ms. Mona, about separating the two entities, but they are still connected, if you will.
I really want to correct the assertion that the reason the Postbank is not currently being looked at as a state bank is because of its financial position. I really don't think that's correct, but also it is not a discussion to be had with the post office. So it is really a government discussion. That's the first thing. The second thing is that the post bank actually has good assets. The post office is the one that is insolvent at this point, technically, in terms of our expenses exceeding our revenue. That's what the AG said last year. So I really think that it's a misreading of the situation to put the post bank into that pot. So the post bank is well on its way towards commercialization, and we would continue to work with them as part of sister companies going forward, but the books would be separate because they already have been.
So moving forward, please continue.
Yes, I wanted to talk to the question around what should people do who continue to bank with Postbank. They must continue banking with Postbank. The deposits are not under threat in any way. In fact, we need more South Africans to come over and bank with the Postbank. So there's no threat of their money going missing or anything at the Postbank.
So The 130 post office branches, that is the number that you are looking at closing or merging, as it were. When is that going to take place, and where can people actually access the names of the affected branches?
Okay, so 130 is no longer the number. It was the number in 2016, and over time, that number has reduced to just under 80. So that is the first thing. The second thing is, as I said earlier, it's going to be happening over time because it's going to take maybe the next 2 to 3 years, because also we want to respect the contracts that we have with our landlords. So we won't just be upping and leaving. We will make sure that when we look at the contract, this is the branch that is on the list, and then we would be able to communicate with people at the time that it happens, because we also need to communicate to them where the alternative service area would be for them. So it's something that's going to happen over time. I do take the fact that it was an alarming headline, 130 branches to be closed. That is actually not the case anymore.
So it's been about, what is it now, Ms. Mona, 2-3 months into the job? And 2 months, what is your assessment now?
Well, it's still a great challenge. I'm still very happy on a personal level that I took the challenge. It's because I still see that we do have the problems that we're having as the post office. However, I see a lot more opportunities in terms of how it is that we can change the post office, because someone else was asking me, what is the relevance of the post office in the South African context now? The relevance still continues, and I think that it's actually getting more now, because people will still need to access government services. There are areas that you have nothing else but the post office in rural areas. So we are in the process of changing the post office and also using our infrastructure as a service, so that in the future you will see a post office that offers a lot more than what it does currently. So my assessment is that we can still make a change, but I also do think that it would be very useful for the post office if the government could come and support us, because we are offering a service to the greater public who will not be able to afford to use any other service at this point.
But has government not been supporting you, Ms. Mona? Have they not been supporting the post office? You speak of new improved offerings. We've been hearing this story from the post office, from successive CEOs. You know, it was spoken about the digitization, you know, of the post office services. I don't know, you know, we keep hearing the story, but we're not seeing the difference.
I suppose the ideas have always been on the table, and the ideas, everybody knows what should happen. I think the difference was in the actual implementation. I can just talk about the time that I'm already here. We have already started implementing on our e-commerce strategy. We've already signed up with wish.com, which is an international company that delivers the parcels and through the post office. That's the first thing. And one of the agreements we ended with them was, once they've tested us, once they see that we can do the work, we could be their gateway into Africa. So that's the first thing that we're doing. We are already on the verge of finalizing 2 other customers. One is also from America, another one is in Malaysia. So we are beginning to do these things, which is why it was important for me to focus a lot more on getting the basics right as I walked into the company. Because if you didn't have the basics right, then what's the use of going out there and getting more business? So that's the first thing. So we are already beginning to see that there's customers who want to work with us. But also, I think, you know, this motor vehicle licensing, this is one project that the post office has been doing relatively well, you know, over the past. But I think because of the queues and the SRD and the grant queues, people tended to think that you can't go to the post office anymore. And yet we had demarcated those queues. The queues for grants were separate to those for other business. But we are now working to make sure that people don't feel like they can't go to the post office anymore, because we are going to be expanding some of our offering. We've got some some really exciting projects in the pipeline.
And I tell you what, we'll speak to you about them. And thanks so much. Hope we'll keep these lines of communication open as we move along. South African Post Office CEO Nomkhita Mona discussing the entity's plan to right-size its operations by merging some of the outlets to cut overhead expenditure, and also discussing other matters related to the South African Post Office. And we'll certainly try and speak to her more regularly.